Hello, OTCers. Welcome to our Monday Digest, and we're going to dive back into John Textor, because since we talked about him and his role in Lyon's relegation to Ligue 2, administrative relegation, because of course they finished in 6th place in Ligue 1 last season, we've had a bit of feedback from that. And of course so much has happened in the meantime as well since we recorded that on Thursday, because of course you can get OTC, the podcast with me, Dotton and guests, every Thursday. Plenty has happened. Lyon are appealing, of course, against that relegation to Ligue 2, as you would expect. But John Textor, who we identified, myself and Jonathan Johnson, as the person who was probably the biggest roadblock to them getting the result they wanted from the appeal, he is no longer the president of Olympique Lyonnais as we go into the new week. So he's been replaced by another Eagle Football Group shareholder, Michele Kang, who bought the Lyon women's team off him last year and has since renamed it to OL Lyon. She will be assisted by Director General, previously sporting director of the Eagle Football Group. Now he's just going to concentrate on Lyon. Michael Gerlinger, who was at Bayern Munich for nearly 20 years. Someone who actually knows his way around top-level European football. Of course, for a lot of people, especially the fans who've been reacting in Lyon, OL fans, the people who gathered outside the Groupama Stadium to protest against John Textor with chants and banners in their thousands at the weekend, a lot of their view is anyone but Textor. And I think that's fair enough, because he came out to Brazilian television on Friday while he was out in the United States for Botafogo's Club World Cup game. And maybe we'll slightly come back to that in a second. And he said, well, look, I have to admit, I just don't really understand the way that football finances work in France, talking about his constant clashes with the DNCG, the French Financial Control Board. The remarkable thing, I suppose, is like Dotton, Jonathan and I were saying on the pod last Thursday, is that it's clear that he didn't understand how it worked from his meetings with the DNCG over successive transfer windows. Of course, as Jonathan pointed out, it's a 6-monthly meeting for every club in France to make sure they're in financial shape. A bit old-fashioned, according to some, and a bit too restrictive in this era of football being so gripped by free market capitalism. Although I think the move to sustainability has to be applauded, and anything that does a bit of that in football is probably globally a good thing. But what Textor never really wanted to or made an effort to grasp is the fact that, as we said last week, it was never up to the DNCG to understand Eagle football and the multi-club model, or that they were planning to float in Wall Street, or projections for the future. The DNCG just deals in reality, cold hard cash, and if there's enough to get a club through the season, which I think is super important, particularly in these times where the French football and Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 are between television deals again, so no clubs are allowed to put down TV revenue on their budgets for the coming season, which makes things difficult. It also underlines the fact that there are allowances made. So Lyon's figures must have been way, way off kilter for the DNCG to take issue with it and go through with their threat to administratively relegate Lyon to the second tier. So I guess we go on to what will happen under Michele Kang and Michael Nerlinger. The first thing, obviously, is the appeal. It seems clear already what the issues were. The issues were the same as before, that the money claimed to be there for Lyon support by John Textor was future money. So future money from the sale of Crystal Palace, which still has to be ratified, as the new owner of Textor's shares has to go through the Premier League's fit and proper persons test, of course. The money that they will apparently make from future sales, from everything else that they plan to do, like float on Wall Street, all that sort of stuff. So the money as well that was presented was money in the account of the Eagle Football Group, not in the account of Olympique Lyonnais. So it's clear they know what they need to do. They know what sort of figures they need to hit. As we pointed out, there is scope for this to be overturned, with the same thing having happened to Monaco in 2003, 2004, in the season that they reached the Champions League final. They were relegated at the start of it. That decision was reversed, and then they went on to have a really successful season under Didier Deschamps. So it is possible, but clearly they've got a short time to work on it. And Kang, who's a very successful business person, who has really got a plan for the Lyon women's team, which is important because since Lyon have dominated the women's football scene for a good decade, things have changed in the last couple of years. You've got other big brands, other big men's football brands getting into European football. We've seen the rise of Barcelona, Real Madrid and Manchester United are involved. Bayern have been growing. And of course, Arsenal were champions of the Women's Champions League this year. So clearly, Lyon have some making up to do as greater finance goes into the world of women's football. And Michele Kang seems prepared for that. So the plan is really for her to be the safe pair of hands, and Nerlinger, who's got that great experience to do that sort of heavy lifting as they move towards appeal. John Textor, on the other hand, may have said he's taking a step back from Lyon and concentrating on, as he put it in his statement, while he was congratulating himself on the sporting successes, apparently, of the last couple of years at Lyon. Still haven't made the Champions League, but anyway. He talked about the fact that he's going to concentrate on the Eagle Football Group. He's going to concentrate on Botafogo. Daring Brussels, the artist formerly known as Molenbeek, the Belgian branch of it that have been ridiculously renamed in the last couple of weeks. And a warning Premier League fans, the Premier League club that they plan to buy in the future. Now, it doesn't seem as if they've identified a particular Premier League club since the deal to buy Everton fell through and the Friedkins got there first. But what's clear is even though Textor is selling his shares in Crystal Palace, that has a lot to do. That doesn't have anything to do with him not wanting to be involved in English football. It has everything to do with he couldn't really get any power for his money at Crystal Palace. Steve Parish was still running things. That was a frustrating thing to him. He hoped to buy the club outright, and that wasn't possible. So then he proceeded to eventually sell the shares a little too late to turn up in the counts of Eagle or Lyon or wherever it needed putting. So next they're going to be on the hunt for another club. Now, look, I don't want to speculate what club it will be, but all that is clear is that John Textor will be involved in English football again. He plans on it, and I'm absolutely sure it will happen at some point. Now, of course, the plus, I suppose, is he won't meet the DNCG again. There's not an equivalent body in English football. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I suppose depends on which way you look at it. Sometimes it's a bit strict, sometimes there's not that latitude. But in terms of stopping clubs digging themselves an absolutely massive hole that they can't get out of is certainly has its uses. And what we've seen with John Textor is he's a big mover of money, and it's always robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we've seen Lyon's money supporting Botafogo before, and a lot of Botafogo fans, certainly vocal Botafogo fans, are still very much in favour of John Textor as president. They've been making that clear. The ones who travelled to the Club World Cup, or the ones that have been going on camera that were out of the Club World Cup anyway. And Botafogo's money has been used to support Lyon. Lyon's assets have been sold to keep the business moving. So the old academy building, the women's club, the LDLC Arena, which was the big basketball concert arena that was built opposite the Groupama Stadium, which Asvel, the basketball club owned by Tony Parker, play in. So I think it gives you those sort of feelings that you had when Leeds United were struggling to keep their heads above water and they were selling the training ground at Thorpe Arch, for example, stuff like that. That's a concern, I think, for the supporters of wherever Textor goes next, because whatever happens next with Everton, at least the Friedkins are doing it with their own money rather than money that's been taken from another club to help keep the whole group afloat. So that's a story to keep our eyes on. And Textor won't disappear from the headlines. He's not a meek guy. He's very much best foot forward. I mean, on the same morning that it was announced that Kang and Nerlinger were taking over at Lyon, it was also announced that John Textor had got rid of another coach, because that's what he does. A Botafogo, Renato Paiva, who authored a week and a half ago, is that how long ago I was there in Los Angeles? Authored that amazing win over Paris Saint-Germain at the Club World Cup. They went out in the last 16, Botafogo in extra time, to domestic rivals Palmeiras at the weekend. And apparently that's it for Renato Paiva, who has had to really put up with a lot since he came in. Of course, a couple of key players leaving. You look at Luis Enrique, you look at Thiago Almada. Had to reconstitute the squad a little bit. There'll be a few more that are going to go. And accordingly, they've not had a brilliant start to this domestic season. But Textor's seen enough, just as he saw enough when Lyon hit a little speed bump under Pierre Sage, who'd done amazing work last season, and replaced him with Paulo Fonseca. Now, of course, this is the final twist, that if Lyon do stay up, the Ligue fixtures were announced last week. Their first game of the season will be against Lens. And since Will's still left, he's been replaced by Pierre Sage, that Lyon loyalist who came up from the academy to look after the first team, was given the job permanently, steered the team away from near certain relegation into a European place. And the first time they had a little hiccup in results, Textor binned him. So I'm sure, even being the sort of circumspect, dignified man he is, I'm sure he'll have a little chuckle to himself if Lens managed to go there and get a result at Lyon on that first day of the season. Of course, that fixture far from sure, certainly as Lyon's European future is far from sure as well, because they've got this agreement with UEFA where they're going to go into the Europa League should they be allowed to stay in the top division. If they're not allowed to stay in the top division, if their appeal fails, they're expected to be removed from the Europa League. That was the way UEFA framed it. It was framed the other way round by John Textor last week when he was still in charge of Lyon, saying, we've agreed with UEFA that we'll be able to compete in the UEFA Europa League next season. Oh, yeah, unless we get relegated, of course, in sort of very small print at the bottom. Now, of course, this kind of affects Crystal Palace as well, because they've been examined for whether they're eligible to compete in the Europa League, despite having won the sporting right through that brilliant FA Cup win against Manchester City, of course, because they're part of the Eagle football galaxy. Now, look, the sale of Textor's shares in Crystal Palace should sort of ease the way. I can understand if Palace fans are a little antsy at the moment after UEFA on this Monday postponed the decision to whether Crystal Palace will be allowed to compete in the Europa League or not. I suspect it's just being postponed until we reach the conclusion of this Lyon thing with the French league, whether they will be allowed to stay in Liga or not. Maybe there'll be further details asked if Lyon are further confirmed in Liga and will compete in the Europa League. Maybe there'll be a bit more detail required in terms of the sale, which, as we said, has to go through the fit and proper persons test before Palace no longer have anything to do with John Textor. So fingers crossed for Crystal Palace and their supporters, and fingers crossed for Olympique Lyonnais and their supporters as we wait to see what happens as we get fairly close to the season. We need it all sorted out to know who's going to be in what competition, with Reims, of course, who are relegated in the playoff from Ligue 1 to Ligue 2, standing to profit and retaining their top division place should Lyon not be allowed to compete next season. Thanks so much for joining us. We're here every Monday on YouTube. Remember to like and subscribe and leave your questions below, because we answer your questions on one of our 2 pods every week. So you can subscribe on your favourite podcatcher. Me and Dotton add a bio every Thursday with On the Continent, the podcast, and Ask OTC, where we answer your questions. You can leave them below or get at us on the socials every Friday.